The Catholic Church is one of the oldest and most influential institutions in human history. For centuries, it has been a beacon of hope, a sanctuary of faith, and a moral compass for over 1 billion believers across the globe. The Church's leaders, its priests, bishops, and cardinals, are meant to embody the highest ideals of morality, spiritual guidance, and trust. But in recent decades, this sacred institution has been plagued by a devastating series of scandals, exposing systemic abuse that has shaken the faithful and cast a long shadow over its revered hierarchy. Among the most shocking revelations are those involving some of the Church's highest-ranking leaders, its cardinals, whose actions and complicity have betrayed not only their vows, but the trust of millions of people worldwide. One of the most notorious cases is that of Theodore McCarrick, a man who once stood as a towering figure within the Catholic hierarchy. As the Archbishop of Washington and a confidant to several popes, McCarrick wielded immense influence both within the Church and in the political arena. He was lauded for his diplomatic skills, his ability to mediate complex issues, and his charismatic leadership. Yet, behind closed doors, McCarrick led a double life. For decades, he used his position to prey upon young seminarians and even minors, exploiting the very people who had placed their faith in him. The allegations, which surfaced publicly in 2018, were not new. They were merely the first to break through the Church's wall of silence. It became clear that senior officials had long been aware of McCarrick's abuses, yet had turned a blind eye. The revelations culminated in his defrocking in 2019, marking the first time in modern Church history that a cardinal had been removed from the priesthood for sexual abuse. But for survivors, the damage was already done. McCarrick's case became a symbol of the Church's broader failure to protect its flock and hold its leaders accountable. In Austria, a similar betrayal came to light with the case of Cardinal Hans Hermann Grower. Once celebrated as a devout and charismatic spiritual leader, Grower's reputation began to unravel in the 1990s when former students accused him of sexually abusing them during his time as a teacher and priest. These revelations struck a deep chord in Austria, a predominantly Catholic country where Grower had been revered. The scandal ignited protests and calls for justice, but the Vatican's response was strikingly inadequate. Grower was quietly relieved of his duties and allowed to retire to a monastery, where he spent the remainder of his life without facing any formal consequences. He died in 2003, leaving behind a legacy of pain and unanswered questions. For many Austrians, the Grower case epitomized the Church's reluctance to confront its leaders' wrongdoing, reinforcing the perception that the institution prioritized its image over the welfare of its faithful. In Scotland, the fall of Cardinal Keith O'Brien was equally devastating. O'Brien, the Archbishop of St. Andrews in Edinburgh, was once a prominent voice in the global Church. Known for his strong advocacy of traditional Catholic values, he was named Cardinal of the Year in 2003, a testament to his perceived moral authority. But in 2013, multiple priests came forward with allegations that O'Brien had engaged in inappropriate sexual behavior spanning decades. In a shocking twist, O'Brien admitted to some of the allegations and resigned in disgrace. His fall from grace was a painful blow to Scotland's Catholic community, many of whom had placed their trust in him as a spiritual guide. O'Brien's case highlighted the pervasive nature of abuse and misconduct, even among the Church's most esteemed leaders. Across the globe in Australia, Cardinal George Pell became one of the most polarizing figures in the Church's modern history. As the Vatican's financial chief and one of Pope Francis's closest advisors, Pell was a powerful and influential figure, yet his legacy was forever tarnished when he was accused of sexually abusing 2 choir boys in the 1990s. The allegations led to a high-profile trial, resulting in Pell's conviction and imprisonment in 2018. For many, this was a moment of justice, a powerful cardinal held accountable for his actions. But the story didn't end there. In 2020, Australia's High Court overturned Pell's conviction, citing insufficient evidence. The decision was met with mixed reactions. While some celebrated it as a victory for justice, others saw it as yet another example of the Church's ability to shield its leaders from accountability. Pell's case remains a deeply divisive chapter in the Church's history, raising difficult questions about power, privilege, and justice. In France, Cardinal Philippe Barbarin faced a scandal of a different nature, one rooted not in his own actions, but in his failure to act. As the Archbishop of Lyon, Barbarin was accused of covering up the crimes of a predatory priest who had abused dozens of children over decades. In 2019, Barbarin was convicted of failing to report the abuse, a decision that sent shockwaves through the French Catholic community. Although his conviction was later overturned on appeal, the damage to his reputation and to the church's credibility was irreversible. Barbarin's case underscored a systemic issue within the church, the tendency of its leaders to prioritize institutional loyalty over the protection of the vulnerable. The list goes on. Cardinal Marc Ouellet, a high-ranking Vatican official, was accused of inappropriate behavior toward a female employee, though the Vatican dismissed the allegations. In Boston, Cardinal Bernard Law became infamous for his role in the clergy abuse scandal that devastated the archdiocese in the early 2000s. Law's decision to reassign abusive priests rather than report them to authorities was exposed in the Pulitzer Prize-winning investigation by the Boston Globe, later dramatized in the film Spotlight. Law eventually resigned, but his actions left a lasting scar on the Catholic community in the United States. In Chile, Cardinal Francisco Errázuriz Osa was implicated in covering up the crimes of Fernando Caradima, one of the country's most notorious pedophile priests. The scandal ignited a national reckoning, culminating in the unprecedented resignation of nearly all of Chile's bishops. Errázuriz's role in enabling abuse brought international attention to the church's culture of secrecy and complicity. Even Cardinal Angelo Sodano, once one of the Vatican's most powerful figures, has faced accusations, not of committing abuse himself, but of covering up numerous cases during his tenure as Secretary of State. Sodano's influence and his apparent protection of abusive priests have made him a symbol of the church's institutional failures. Each of these cases reveals a troubling pattern, one of abuse, cover-ups, and a failure to live up to the ideals that the church preaches. For the survivors, these scandals are not just stories. They are lived experiences of pain, betrayal, and injustice. Their courage in coming forward has forced the church to confront its darkest secrets, but the road to healing and reform remains long and uncertain. As the church grapples with these revelations, it must ask itself, how can it rebuild trust? How can it ensure that such atrocities are never repeated? And how can it truly honor the faith and dignity of those it was meant to protect? The Catholic Church is at a crossroads. Its future depends not only on its ability to confront its past, but on its willingness to embrace transparency, accountability, and compassion. Only then can it begin to heal the wounds it has inflicted and reclaim its place as a source of hope and moral leadership in a world that so desperately needs it. This expanded and cohesive narration weaves together the stories of 10 cardinals, creating a compelling, immersive experience that provides historical context, emotional resonance, and a call for accountability.